AETHERDRIFT has brought us 2 new pre-constructed commander decks, and in this video we're going to go over both of them and how they operate, and we're going to upgrade them a little bit, take some cards out and put some cards back in to make them instantly more competitive right out of the box.
And we didn't break the bank here too. We tried to keep budget in mind for these. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video because we are going to rank the 2 decks against each other. And make sure to use the timeline of this video as well if you want to skip around and look for that exact deck or the upgrade or just us explaining it. We made sure to put chapters in there to make it easy for you. And if you do find any part of this video helpful, or if you like these upgrades, please subscribe. It helps out a lot. Even if you're just here for one deck, click that subscribe button, and we hope to see you back in the future. Highest level of gratitude to our patrons who power the channel through Patreon. Check out the Patreon link in the description to learn about monthly giveaways, VIP Discord access, and even our official playmat.
Jake and Joel Are Magic is brought to you by Card Conduit, the best place to sell your cards quickly and easily on the internet. Take your unused cards worth 50 cents or more buy list and fire them over to Card Conduit. They'll send you a check, and that is the entire transaction. Use our code for a percentage off your fees. Also, Dragon Shield, the best way to protect your cards. Best sleeves in the multiverse. We swear by them. Go get yourself some Dragon Shields.
That's right. And also thank you to TCG Player, our sponsor, which is an online marketplace where you can go to find all of your favorite cards at competitive prices. As there are so many people that are using TCG Player and selling on TCG Player, you're going to find the best prices for your favorite cards. And then also a site that we're going to be using today, Moxfield. We're going to be using this fun feature on Moxfield that allows us to tag certain cards so that we can look at exactly the upgrades that we're going to put in these decks. Make sure to use Moxfield for organizing all of your decks and sharing your decks with your friends. The first deck we're talking about is Eternal Might, the Esper, meaning white, blue, black deck, and it is a zombie deck. And at the helm of it, we have Temet, Noctimon's Will, a black, a blue, a white, and 2 other for a 4/4 legendary creature zombie wizard that reads Vigilance Menace. Whenever you attack, draw a card, then discard a card, so it has looting built into it. And whenever you draw a card, zombies you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So this is a commander that comes with a looting, meaning you're going to draw a card and discard a card. So don't think of it as like typical draw. Something does need to be discarded. And then whenever you draw a card, zombies you control are getting a buff, +1/+1 until end of turn, meaning if you draw a lot of cards, your team is going to get a lot of +1/+1 until end of turn. This commander is pretty straightforward. As you're going to see with this deck, we're running a lot of good zombies, a lot of zombies that you would expect to see. And then you're also going to find some zombies that have cycling built into them. You're going to find some zombies that have embalm. If we're discarding cards, being able to embalm something that we discard is pretty good. Embalm is a cost that you can pay, kind of like flashback. You're also going to see Eternalize in here.
Yeah, very similar mechanics.
Very similar mechanics. So like, for example, if you cycle away using Plains Cycling, discard this card, search your library for a Plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand. So now Timeless Dragon is in the graveyard, but you can Eternalize it, meaning once it's in the graveyard, you can pay 2 white and 2 other, exile this card from your graveyard, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 black zombie dragon with no mana cost. Eternalize only as a sorcery. If we're cycling stuff away, if stuff is going to the graveyard, this deck is working to make sure that we're able to animate some of that stuff from the graveyard as well. That way we're not just pitching cards that we can't use later. There's also big payoffs in the deck as well. You're going to see stuff like the Scarab God. You also have Grave Titan in here, which I know some people are probably going to cringe at seeing that. But there's a lot of really good zombies in here. And I will say this about the deck. Just at a glance by itself, before looking at any of the upgrades, the deck looks very, very solid. There's stuff in here. There's not really a lot to change. You're going to see stuff like Path to Exile that came in. You're going to see like a lot of, there's some good artifacts in here like Banner of Kinship and Coat of Arms that got brought in. Let's take a look at some of these red cards here. The enchantments, for example, Renewed Solidarity. This is a card that a lot of people are pretty hyped on. 1 white, 2 other. As this enchantment enters, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+0. We're going to be naming zombies, obviously. And at the beginning of the end step, for each token you control of the chosen type that entered this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. So you're going to be thinking of cards like Anointed Procession. You're going to be thinking of stuff like that. This card kind of enters the ranks of those cards. I think this is a very good card. How do you feel about Renewed Solidarity, Joel? Pretty strong, right?
Huge. I would lean into as many zombie token strategies as I possibly could with this deck, with that discard draw anthem, that card draw anthem. It's not difficult to draw 2, 3, 4 cards in a turn if you're dedicated to focusing on doing that. And so every time you go wider, that's just 2, 3, 4, 5 more power on that thing on top when it's going to attack. So yeah, I mean, any of the amass cards work fantastic in this deck, and making copies of those armies, that's typically not something that mechanic does. It just goes tall. This is a card that helps that mechanic go wide, and so you're getting better value out of your zombie tokens, and you're getting better value out of any amass cards than ever before with cards like this and cards like your commander.
On Wings of Gold is another card that's really good. That's a brand new card, 1 white, 3 other. Creatures you control that are zombies and or tokens get +1/+1 and have flying. Holy cow. And whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 1/1 white zombie creature token. So this card kind of feels like a card that would have come out of Amonkhet. That's where we got a lot of white zombies.
Definitely.
Yeah, dude, it's pretty sweet, man. The deck is really good right out of the box. All right, so let's talk about our cuts. And we're going to see, I moved the cuts to the sideboard here. Typically with these precons, they like to go heavy on the lands. And one of the things that I noticed with this deck is there were 39 lands in here. And I decided to cut some basics down. I ended up cutting 4 lands, and you'll see that I actually brought a land in as well. So we end up staying at 36 lands, going down to 36 lands from 39. I typically see these precons like to go heavy on land. And so that's a spot that I like to chop. And you might be like, well, you don't want to cut a lot of lands. But if you look, there are a ton of mana rocks in this deck as well. They like to do that with these 3-color decks. And so I feel like we're pretty good at 36 lands. I cut an island, a plains, and 2 swamp. We cut Pull from Tomorrow, even though it works well with our commander. It's going to like buff the team. You're going to draw a lot of cards and discard a card. That ends up getting cut just because Pull from Tomorrow, more often than not, feels like kind of a mid card to me. Commander Sphere is also a card that is kind of mid as well. If we're going to be running a Manalith, I would rather it be a better one, and you'll see that we brought in one that's also a 3-cost mana rock, but it also does more for our team. I also think Plague Belcher is kind of a mid zombie as well, even though when it comes in, you know, you're whenever another zombie you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. That's not a bad effect, but I also think, you know, there could just be a better zombie to play other than Plague Belcher. Then we also cut Eternal Skylord just because at a rate of 5 mana, even though it does work with our commander with the amass, there are better creatures that we can run. And then Liliana Death's Majesty as well got cut just because Planeswalkers in commander typically don't do that well. This is one that works really well with zombies, but it ended up being a cut for better cards. And then finally Commence the End Game. It can't be counter, draw 2 cards, and amass Zombies X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. Sure, if you have a ton of cards in your hand, you're going to get a lot of value out of this. But for 6 mana, it just doesn't seem that strong. Let's talk about the upgrades. Because there are cards with swamp cycling and plain cycling, I was like, let's go ahead and we'll splash a little bit of cash into a Godless Shrine. And that will be a land that we can go and grab when we're cycling away our Timeless Dragon or whatever that big zombie is, Twisted Abomination, that you can swamp cycle away. Wanted to bring in a Godless Shrine. We also brought in Mystic Remora because Pull from Tomorrow got cut, and that's a draw spell. Wanted to have a draw spell kind of replace that, and Mystic Remora doesn't put as big a target on your back as Rhystic Study does, and it also only costs $5 compared to like 35 or 40 that Rhystic is.
Yeah.
So I thought Mystic Remora kind of completes that goal.
With Mystic, you want to be careful with this deck because you're thinking about attacking as a parlay from your card draw. So you're drawing cards into pumping your army and then attacking. Mystic Remora is going to give you more cards for less mana than a card like Pull from Tomorrow, but on your turn, you're not going to be able to force an activation of Mystic Remora. And so drawing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards to give your whole army plus 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is a way you can take this if you want to go wider, you want to go with even more tokens. We've leaned into some more of just like, make sure that you've got your full hand Mystic Remora in a vacuum, stronger card for sure. Just know that it's not going to like synergize like an overrun, basically. Essentially what they've done with your commander's ability is give you an overrun type ability in Esper that you have to jump through another hoop to achieve. And Mystic Remora is going to probably keep your hand more full across the course of a game for sure, but not going to let you overrun necessarily. Just a note on Mystic Remora.
That is a good note. And there are going to be some people that watch this video and they don't agree with the pull from tomorrow cut, because you make a good point. You know, if I'm swinging out with the team and it comes in unblocked, then I go, okay, in response, I'll pull from tomorrow. If you like that idea, pull from tomorrow being a good way to buff your entire team at instant speed, I would cut pull from tomorrow and probably bring in a Sphinx's Revelation, just because it's also a very cheap card and it's going to do more for you as well. You're going to gain life and you're also going to draw cards.
Swap, yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I think that pull is probably pretty good in the deck, but I would replace it with the Sphinx's Rev if you want that. Now, if we're in white, there's no way I'm not going to run Path to Exile.
I will not give you any pushback or argument on Path, I promise.
Do you think Path is pretty good?
Probably pretty good in this deck.
It seems pretty good. Yeah, Path to Exile. This is a card that, you know, when you get in sweatier pods, your opponents are probably going to fail to find because there's so few basics. But because we cut some basics, I brought in a Path to Exile just because we already talked about how we're kind of heavy on land. It's just a top tier removal spell. We're going to run it alongside Swords to Plowshares, which is already in the Precon deck list. Now, Oversold Cemetery is a card because we're cycling so much away, because stuff is going to be dying, because this deck is heavy creatures, and because we are just filling up our graveyard like we talked about. Oversold Cemetery seems like a good card at the beginning of your upkeep. If you have 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, which we likely will, you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So let's start getting back some of that value when we start to fill up the yard on this 2-cost enchantment that used to be way more expensive than 40 cents. It seems like it fits well in the deck. And also Diregraph Captain from Dark Ascension. There's not a lot of cards from Dark Ascension that are good, but Diregraph Captain is definitely a zombie card you want. It has Death Touch. It's a 2/2 for 3, but it is a lord for your zombies. Other zombies you control get +1/+1, and whenever another zombie you control dies, target opponent loses 1 life. So we cut a card that has that kind of similar effect on it. We brought this in instead. So this would be probably like over the Plague Belcher at 3 cost. We're going to bring in the Diregraph Captain just because I think it does more for our team.
It's a good example of a 1-for-1 swap with these precons of just upgrading a single cards to a strictly better version.
Yes.
I definitely prefer the Anthem tied onto it versus the downside, so to speak, that Plague Belcher had come with. If you do want to stack these abilities, you're going super wide, you can run both. You get a higher chance of both abilities happening with a build that's more like Blood Artisty and Zulaport Cutthroaty, if you want to go that route.
Sure. And before we talk about our 3 artifacts here, let's talk about Wilhelt and Macias.
Yeah.
So Wilhelt, this was also a commander as well, and it just fits so well in
Probably
here.
one of the commanders if you're discussing zombie commanders.
Yes, not only is it a zombie itself, which makes it a shoo-in in the deck, but it has a massive ability. A black, a blue, and 2 other. Whenever another zombie you control dies, if it didn't have Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. It can't block. When it attacks, sacrifice it at the end of combat. And then at the beginning of your end step, you may sack a zombie if you do draw a card. And there is no discard a card on that. This is just a little bit more draw in the deck. And it's also a zombie that is going to give your team that much more potency. Just seems like a very good inclusion. And then also Macias, which is very much a Jake card. If anybody knows, this is one of my babies in Magic the Gathering. I just love this card so much. It is a zombie cleric, 3 black, 3 other for a 5/5 intimidate. Whenever a human deals damage to you, destroy it, but we don't really care about that. Other non-human creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Undying. So as our zombies die, they come back with a 1/1 counter on them. And so they just get stronger. This is definitely a big kind of payoff card for our zombie team. As you can see, it does cost 6. So it's one of our more expensive cards in the deck. But it is a great card that's going to make our team that much more difficult to deal with.
Very good, zombie.
And then let's talk about these 3 artifacts. They're all kind of similar. Patrick Banner is the 1-to-1 swap for the Commander Sphere. They both cost 3. They're both a manalith, meaning you can tap them for 1 mana of any color. But Patrick Banner is going to work with our zombies. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. And then it's doing what Commander Sphere does, except Commander Sphere has that ability that lets you sack it to draw a card. But as we can see, there's already some draw built into our upgrades. Banner of Kinship, because this card is just stupid.
Broken.
It's absolutely busted. It's not that expensive. And then you also have Coat of Arms, which does a very similar kind of thing, except it's for the entire board. So if you're in a kindred kind of pod, everybody's like, one person's on zombies, one person's on dinos, one person's on, rats. Yeah, you probably are not going to want to play Coat of Arms. Let this be one of the cards that you pitch away to the draw and discard that comes with your commander. But other than that, it's going to be a big buff for the team. And only 10 cards cut because the deck, as we mentioned, is already pretty refined. I would always go in and probably tune up the mana base. I think you could bring in like Field of the Dead just because it's thematic. There's obviously cards that are more expensive. You could go with an Anointed Procession, and I would bring in Demonic Tutor and stuff like that. Probably a couple more board wipes if you wanted to really up the price of the deck and put some dollars into it. But this list looks pretty strong to me as is.
Before we move on from the Kindred deck, I want to talk about Banner of Kinship real fast. Jake and I are currently, at this time, it may already be out when you're seeing this video, but we're working on a new project, a live play Commander game show. Check the pinned comment if you want to go subscribe to that channel before it comes out, or subscribe after they've come out if they're out already. Banner of Kinship, we played a Kindred episode, and this card got played twice. Y'all, this thing is insane. It is Coat of Arms on steroids. When it enters, you choose the creature type, and it enters with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you already control of the chosen type. Imagine all of your creatures just getting +4/+4, +5/+5 until the rest of the game, until the game is over, because that's what happens. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on this artifact. So in a Kindred deck, this represents a, whoops, I probably just won type of card, because if you've got 10 zombie tokens on the battlefield and they all only have a couple of different little things happening, you drop this Banner of Kinship, all of your 2/2 zombies, let's just say, become 12/12 zombies. You attack out, all of that damage is done. Let's say I pass to Jake and Jake them board wipes. You know what happens with that next zombie that I play? It still gets +10/+10. All I have to do is make another 1/1 and I've got an 11/11 on the board all of a sudden. Banner of Kinship is such a threat when it drops. It's such a threat ongoing. This is just a very good card. And go check that pinned comment if you want to go sub to the channel where we've got some live Commander gameplay going, and you can see us punch each other with Banners of Kinship. Okay, so I worked on the Living Energy Precon with Saheeli, Radiant Creator at the helm, a red, a blue, and a green, and 1 for a 4/4 Human Artificer. It says whenever you cast an Artificer or Artifact spell, you get an energy counter, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can pay 3 energy counters, and when you do, you create a token that's a copy of target permanent you control, except it's a 5/5 artifact creature in addition to its other types and has haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Saheeli has a lot of potential value built in, and that's kind of how the deck plays. It's just value plays all the way up. Everything you do, you want to be creating energy. You want to be on your landfalls, like with Nissa World Soul Speaker. Whenever a land you control enters, you get 2 energy counters, and you can pay 8 energy rather than pay the mana cost for permanent spells you cast. We're casting some pretty big spells too. Look at this value plays all the way up into the 6 mana range. 6 mana for Territorial Aetherkite. It's a 6/5 with flying and haste. When it enters, you get 2 energy. You'll see that as a very strong theme. You want to be generating energy off of every action you take if you can. Then with Territorial Aetherkite, you can pay 1 or more energy, and when you do, this creature deals that much damage to each other creature. So it's creating this resource that you can use in addition to all of your other resources, and hopefully generating it slowly and a lot over the course of the game. You've got cards like this, Etheric Amplifier, 3 mana, tap to add a mana of any color. It's your little manalith here with more value. And then pay 4 and tap it to choose one as a sorcery. double the number of each kind of counter on a permanent, or double the number of each kind of counter you have. This deck, I've played a lot of the energy decks over the past 2 years, the Fallout versions, the MH3 version, and now this one. Y'all, I've never had a deck make more energy than this deck. Aetherflux Conduit, 6 mana. When you cast a spell, you get an amount of energy equal to the amount of mana spent to cast that spell.
Wow.
You can tap it and pay 50 energy to draw 7 cards and cast any number of spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. This deck builds energy, builds energy, builds energy, and then explodes. With Saheeli's ability here, we want to be copying for 3 mana creatures or permanents that have enters the battlefields or leaves the battlefields or make more energy for us, because we just want to kind of value it all the way up, be netting a couple energy here, netting a couple of cards here, and as the time gets right, we can make a copy of something with an enormous enters the battlefield or an enormous payoff. Look at this, Aetherwind Basker. Imagine making a copy of this thing. When it enters or attacks, you get an energy for each creature you control. You've got Aetherwind and you've got Saheeli on the battlefield at the very least to achieve this, and then that Aetherwind Basker would be the third. So the copy of 5/5 Aetherwind Basker enters, creates you 3 energy, gets to attack because it's got haste, creates you another 3 energy. Let's look at a card though like Duplicate, Jake. When this creature enters, you may exile target non-token creature. That's the type of permanent we want to be copying. We don't care about anything else because we have a repeatable copy of Duplicate over and over again, just exiling target non-tokens every time it enters the battlefield as a 5/5 copy, by the way, and then it attacks for 5 just to add insult to injury. So with this one, like I said, lots of value. I feel like Teamer Energy is just where this archetype is supposed to be. It's where it feels the best, and I've played all of the energy decks over the last 2 years. This one so far feels the best. Looking at the upgrades, Jake, cards I took out. Took out 22. I went pretty heavy on this one. Like I've said, I've played a lot of energy over the past 365 days. Already gotten a play test in of this deck as well, and so I went pretty specifically. There was a Thopter's sub-theme in this that you can see with Loyal Apprentice, you can see with Pia and Kieran, you can see with Thopter Network, Psy, Master Thopterist. You can go that route if you want. I wanted to go bigger and splashier, and so I took out that sub-theme altogether. Okay, so looking at specifics, Cultivator's Caravan. I chopped this. It's a manolith that is a rock. It can be a vehicle. Exactly. It doesn't have the synergies that I've explained to you. No ETB, no leaves the battlefield. It's already only a 5/5. Like, we can, make a 5/5 copy of this and add a mana? I don't know. There's no point to it to me, and so it's gone. We cut the Thopter sub-theme. It wants, the commander, Saheeli, wants to see you cast artifacts and artificers. It doesn't want to see you create them. That doesn't give us any extra value. So Loyal Apprentice creating a Thopter at the beginning of combat on our turn, really sweet in some decks that want that ETB or want that extra artifact to hit the battlefield or some extra affinity piece. Not relevant for us. Conjurer's Closet. There's a lot of ETBs already built into this, and if you go with more, I would say that this is a good card to maybe leave back into the deck. But as it stands, there's like maybe 10, maybe 12 creatures, even after my upgrade, that have strong ETBs. Our commander doesn't have it, and that's kind of the big breaker for me on Conjurer's Closet, is that I'm not guaranteed to always be getting like a sweet ETB or exits the battlefield off of my commander. And then when I look, I've only got like 10 or 12 other hits in the deck that could even take advantage of this. And so because I don't like cards that might be nothing in our hand or on our board, this is one that I chopped. Druid of Purification. So this is a strictly fantastic card. It's a really good commander card, y'all.
It's very good.
Yes.
Yeah.
4 mana for a 2/3. When it enters, starting with you, each player chooses an artifact or enchantment you don't control. Destroy each permanent chosen this way. So 4 things leave the battlefield unless people are doubling up on their choices, which is their prerogative. It could be a maximum of 2 if they all pick the same thing and then you pick one as well. But in this deck, I wanted to make room for cards that had that energy symbol on them, baby. We want every single card, every single thing we possibly do. If we sneeze or blink, we want to be creating an energy counter on ourselves. And so Druid of Purification, go put it in one of your other green decks because the card is dope. but it's just not what we want to be doing here. Thopter Spy Network, typically fantastic card for artifacts. There's a lot of good card draw in here already. I didn't ever feel like card advantage was a problem with this deck. On top of that, it's the Thopter strategy, so meh. Combustible Gear Hulk, I hate this card. I've always hated this card. I think some people like it, but it's just a card that I cut from precons all the time. Arcane Denial got chopped for a card that creates energy when it does that thing. PN Kieran, Thopter strategy, not necessary. Good ETB on Solemn, but no energy symbol anywhere on this card, so it ended up getting the axe as a result of that. Elder Gargaroth, man, this is one that is a confusing thing. I think this is just in here because it's not a bad thing to make a copy of and then attack. You can draw a card, you can create a token, but oh my gosh, y'all, this is so off of synergy for us and only applies to our synergy in like one. It doesn't even have an enters the battlefield. If it said whenever this creature enters or attacks, I'm like, yeah, boy. We're getting 2 cards every single time we make a copy of Gargaroth. I'm into it. 1, no, thank you. Hate that card. Chain Reaction, good board wipe. We want energy cards, and so it chopped. Stride Hanger Automaton. This is a new card, and typically I don't cut new cards from precons until they're well practiced, and I'm like, okay, it's definitely not a card I want in here because every card needs a chance. But Thopters you control get +1/+1. You can see this is the strategy. This was an easy way to go in there and just extricate an entire group of cards that would give us room for energy cards. And so I cut the brand new card Stride Hanger Automaton.
That thing does not make sense as a 1/4, just given its scale.
Yeah, it is a real big thing. Maybe it's so worried about it can't attack you because it's so worried about balancing all of the Thopters on it. It doesn't want any of the Thopters to be destroyed.
There's a Mummy from Amonkhet that's tiny, that's a 2/4 that costs 3. It's like I don't know. Anyway.
Chromatic Lantern was a cut. Manolith, it's a 3-color deck, not bad. It really helps, and I like that this has got the 3 colors in it that are in this deck. That's kind of an interesting choice here that are facing forward. But energy stuff, we cut it. We cut this because of the Thopter strategy. This I really don't understand. It's just a way, I guess, to make a ton of artifacts enter the battlefield all at once if you wanted to achieve that. It kind of falls into the same thinking as the Thopter strategy for me, where it's like, I want to create a bunch of little artifacts and get payoffs as a result of that. And so I chopped it along with the Thopter cards. That could be a way that you want to take this deck. Commander Sphere, because we mostly cut that out of precons to get something more synergistic. Disallow, we can do better on counter spells, and there are counter spells that have to do with energy. Triplicate Titan, I put in some other big payoffs for this. Now, don't get me wrong, this card is super dope at the top of this deck. I just don't want a ton of 9 mana things at the top of this deck, and so I swapped out, and you'll see which one I put in there instead of this. Now look, creating a copy of Triplicate Titan, it comes in as a Flying Vigilant Trampling 5/5, not bad. And when it dies, you do get 9 power with 3 different abilities onto the battlefield. You can ask Jake. I pulled this off in one of our play tests of this deck, and I was just making a copy of Triplicate Titan every turn, adding power to the ground, or minus the 1 flyer, with the dies trigger when you sacrifice it at the end of turn. I just wanted to take the top end of the deck a different way, so I cut Triplicate Titan, but very fantastic, strong, powerful top end there. Ornithopter of Paradise, we put it into Mana Rocks and not... I don't have any +1 counter stuff. I don't want to make a copy of Ornithopter of Paradise. You know what I'm saying? It's just fine. It got chopped. Reckless Fireweaver, you can see I cut the strategy that was a bunch of little things all entering the battlefield. This is the payoff for that. This is a type of payoff that you would have for a bunch of Thopters or a bunch of treasures entering the battlefield. Take it that direction if you want. I went Stompier Energy. And then I also chopped 2 forests out of here. There were a ton of Mana Rocks, and there were 38 lands in this deck. I think we can go down to 36 and maintain some value as well, because we put stuff like Talisman of Creativity in here. Let's just take those 3 Mana Rocks, take them down a mana, get them out earlier, get going. You're going to be sort of an arch enemy with this deck, because you're going to be making value just crazy town all through the game. And so getting a little faster start, not bad. And these are down to $1 each. Is it Generatorium and Generatorium?
I don't know. Is it?
Yes, it is. Very good to play in this. If you would get 1 or more energy, you get that many +1 energy instead. You've seen cards like this for +1 counter strategies. This is the one for energy strategies. Tap it, draw a card. If you've lost 4 or more energy this turn, very easy to do, especially when our commander's giving us an ability to pay 3 to make a copy of something. MH3, very cheap card that you need to have in this deck. Card. This is
a really good inclusion here. I like this one a lot.
100%. This is why there are so many cuts to this deck. It's because between Fallout and MH3, you got a ton of low mana value producing pieces, like Is It Generatorium here, and you want those in over other pieces because it's just going to add to your snowball effect. Tune the narrative. Draw a card, you get 2 energy. Very simple. Yeesh. Not going to win the game, but it's going to help you get to the place that you want to be. Volatile Stormdrake, holy man, enters the battlefield. That's what you need to see. So if we make copies of this, it's flying. It's got hexproof from activated and triggered abilities for what it's worth, and it makes energy. When it enters the battlefield, you exchange control of your new token and target creature an opponent controls. If you do, you get 4 energy, and then you sack the creature that you stole unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana value. How about every single turn? How about every single turn? And talking about 3 energy paid to make the copy of Volatile Stormdrake, if you swap it with a creature on your opponent's battlefield, immediately getting 4 back, so you net an energy on this copy, plus you've swapped creatures with somebody temporarily, and you can make it permanent if you spend energy. Really love this card in this deck. Thought Monitor.
Finally a really good spot for Volatile Stormdrake. You know, this was a card that came out, was super hyped, and didn't really have a home, and looks good in here.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Thought Monitor, one of the few cards in here that don't have energy in the text box that I'm adding. Affinity for artifacts, it's so simple to get this thing down for like 1, 2, or 3 mana. I don't think I've ever paid more than 3 mana for a Thought Monitor. And making copies of it to get 2 card draws seems really good. Make a 5/5 flyer, draw 2 cards for 3 energy. Really good value. Cursed Mirror enters the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. Seems cool to make a copy of Cursed Mirror over and over again, constantly copying some big, giant, ridiculous creature on the battlefield. Interesting strategy there. I don't really like Cursed Mirror, but I think it plays really well in this deck because you can make copies of it. Assaultron Dominator enters the battlefield, gives you 2 energy, and whenever an artifact creature you control attacks, you can pay an energy, give it a +1 counter, a first strike, trample, or a first strike or a trample counter. Really strong. You can see Amped Rapper. This card is banned in Modern. We're running it in this deck. It lets you impulse draw, as does Unstable Amulet. Enters the battlefield, 2 energy. You can tap it to pay 2 energy to exile top card of your library, and you can play it until you exile another card. You can just let it sit there.
This card is so good. Yeah.
Octomancer. Very, very rarely will I put a card that is this off of synergy with what we're trying to do. However, at the beginning of each end step, create a token that's a copy of target creature token that entered the battlefield this turn. Get a permanent copy, dude. A permanent copy with your Octomancer. You pay 3 energy, you make a copy of whatever permanent you want to make a copy of. Then Octomancer, you stack these triggers at the end of turn. Before you sacrifice that token that Saheeli made, Octomancer sees it, makes a permanent, it doesn't leave the battlefield copy of that token. And then you sacrifice the other one. So
is there
silly.
Because it's a May on the gift.
Yes.
What happens if you don't gift the octopus? What am I missing here?
Nothing. That is an allowance so that you could create an 8/8 blue octopus creature token if you wanted to with Octomancer the turn it came in.
That's what I thought the point of it was. I was just making sure.
It gives you an immediate thing to copy, basically, so that you can have a big creature the turn it comes in the battlefield. But I just love the synergies with Saheeli here, making copies of the copies. Really sweet.
Do you want to run like a doubling season in here? I know that's a huge expensive upgrade, but it seems good in this
potentially
deck
potentially, especially if you go further. You're only making 1 copy per turn with your commander, but it is 1 copy per turn, and that's not nothing. With those kind of token doublers, you really want to be dumping like 3 or 4 tokens at a time so that you're making that 6 or 8 tokens instead.
Sure.
But easily, if you look at that Thopter synergy, you don't want to take that out of this deck like I did. Huge. Absolutely could go that route. You've got green in a deck that makes Thopters. Like, that's insane.
Right.
That's insane.
Yeah,
for sure.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Aurora Shifter, 2 mana for a 1/3. When it deals combat damage to a player, you get that many energy. That's relevant because we're making a 5/5 token creature copy of this, and so it's automatically a 5 power, so when it connects with a player, you get 5 energy. Rest of it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can pay 2 energy, and when you do, Aurora Shifter becomes a copy of another target creature you control, except it has this ability, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you get that many energy. So you can make it a copy of some huge thing, or you can copy it to get more energy through the attacks. This is the exact kind of value plays we want to be doing with this deck. This is one to copy. Flying Trample, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get that many energy. It's a 5/5 Flying Trampler. We get that many energy when it connects. Value plays here, it's a Lightning Bolt, except you can scale it up with more energy. You get 3 energy when you play it, and then you can pay any amount and deal that much damage to either a creature or a planeswalker.
Pretty good.
Pay 3 energy, draw a card is what Shielded Aether Thief says on it. I feel like that's just really good value in this deck, period. And when it does block, you can generate energy off of it, which is nice. I told you we took a 9 mana artifact out for a 9 mana artifact, and this is what we put in here. This is one of the big money cards that I think just is sick in this deck, because you land the Portal to Phyrexia. Let's say you got Saheeli on the battlefield. You land Portal to Phyrexia. All of your opponents have to sacrifice 3 creatures. We start into our Saheeli seriousness, make a copy of Portal to Phyrexia. They have to sacrifice 3 more creatures. That thing gets to attack as a 5/5 pass. Comes back to us, and we're returning creatures from graveyards, any graveyard. Yeah, kind of annoying, very brutal. 6 creature board wipe, one-sided for 9 mana plus your Saheeli activation. Pretty mean. And then it starts returning your stuff or their stuff if there's really stompy things to do. Ethereum Sculptor, value play, reduces the cost of your artifacts. Let's make that Portal to Phyrexia a 9 cost. Landfall of getting an energy and then pay 6 energy, draw 3 cards. I told you, I've never had a deck make as much energy as this deck is capable of producing. And so paying 6 to draw 3 cards seems like a really good value in here. A Motherlode is from the Fallout, enters the battlefield. There you go. That's what we need. It is a legend, notably. So making a copy of this, you're going to have to choose to keep your original one, hopefully, and sacrifice the token immediately so you won't get to attack. But whenever the Motherlode Excavator enters the battlefield, choose target opponent, you get an amount of energy equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. So if you just need a chunk of energy income, you can make a copy of Motherlode and then sack that token as it comes in, as it sees itself and needs to make the legend rule happen. Then on top of that, it does have an attack ability itself. You can pay 4 energy on the attack, and when you do, destroy target non-basic land defending player controls, and creatures that player controls without flying can't block this turn. So have a little way to get through, have a way to start hating their Gaia's Cradles off the battlefield. All instances of Cabal coffers go away to the Motherlode Excavator. I really like the idea of copying an Aether Theorist. I love the idea, number 1, of running KLD commons in a deck that make them good. That's just exciting to me. Aether Theorist, you pay 3, make a copy of it. It ETBs, you get 3 energy. Seems pretty good. Then it can also tap, pay an energy, scry. We came down, or I added in an island. I showed you in the cuts that I cut 2 forests. I came down 1 land overall in the deck and readjusted to more of a heavier play on the blue basics just out of the box. It's a really easy swap for you to do. And as you can see, I've added a lot of blue to the deck. It's mostly a blue deck at this point. And so I did swap 1 forest for 1 island straight up. Blaster Hulk, MH3, Big Daddy here. Costs 1 less for each energy you've paid or lost this turn, which is very relevant. 3 for the commander's ability. And this is down to a 5 mana hasty 8/8. Whenever it attacks, you get 2 energy, and then you can pay 8 energy. And when you do, it deals 8 damage, divided as you choose among 8 targets. Any targets. Choose those targets. Divide that 8 damage, and then they have an 8/8 haster to deal with after that. Past that,
I told you, put a Basilisk collar on that guy. Just
so insane.
Ping the board,
right?
You know,
and that's relevant in this deck. Playing an artifact like that, you can argue that deck. Yeah, I love that. Past that, I told you counterspell that I wanted to swap out for an energy counterspell. At this point, there's enough cards over the past 2 years where you can do that. Just have energy symbols in your deck, and your deck will be better. This one says choose target spell. You get 2 energy, and then you can pay any amount of energy, counter that spell unless its controller pays 1 for each energy paid this way. So as you can see, there are more additions and cuts than I would typically do to a precon right out of the box. But with the amount of energy support we've gotten over the past year, I think that this is a really fun way to take this deck. Want to mention too, some cards that didn't make the list that you might want to take a peek at. Padim is just good for drawing cards at the beginning of your upkeep. If you control the artifact with the highest mana value or tie for the highest mana value, draw a card. So if you want some more card advantage, put this in there. If you want to be super mean, it's a little off theme, not an artifact here, but talk about making copies of an insane permanent. Agent of Treachery is just the one to make copies of. Same thing with Cyberdrive. Cyberdrive works really well in that version of the deck that I didn't play, which is more Thopters, more treasures, more artifacts entering the battlefield. Making copies of Cyberdrive Awakener here every single turn, turning all your treasures into flying 4/4s seems pretty brutal. Good energy attacker here that can provide you energy under the right circumstances. And then Canoptic Scarab Swarm, a good one to make copies of. 5/5 flyer copy that's going to enter the battlefield. An Asa Graveyard, pretty brutal. Another counterspell if you want to run more counterspells that have to do with energy. And then a huge artifact that has to do with getting more and more. It's just top end. I was a little high on the top end, so you might want to consider this for your top end. And then if you do start going into lands, I didn't mess with the land base at all, besides dropping one basic down and swapping out a force for an island, so we were a little skewed bluer. But there is a good energy land with Helios 1 from Fallout, and then obviously start with your Triome and go from there when you're looking at a 3-color deck.
I think the player that wants to take more game actions is going to be the player that is going to be playing the energy deck. You're going to be generating a ton of energy. You're going to be fiddling with your dice and putting your dice up. And
there's a lot of numbers to keep up with. I've played
and,
energy. I've played this version of energy. This deck, there's a lot of numbers to keep up with. And so if you want to veg out, this is not the deck for you. It's a very, like you said, active-y, trinket-y, touchy-feely deck.
Yeah, if you want to be constantly, messing with your dice and having players look at you and be like, what are you doing? And you're like, I've got so much to do over here. Then I would say, the energy deck is the way to go. For me, I think I lean more toward the zombie theme just because I like zombies more. I like that it's kind of just like this kindred, go wide, make a bunch of zombies. I like drawing cards, so being able to cycle stuff away to draw cards kind of appeals to me more. It's hard for me not to have a bias against energy from years ago, dealing with Teamer Energy and like Teamer Black, and all of that time where energy was really oppressive in standard season. But I do think both decks are going to be really fun. They both have blue, so they both got some power going on in there. I don't know, man. It's really hard for me to lean one way or the other, but I think if I had to pick and you put me in a situation, there's both decks in front of me, I have to pick one. I think I'm going to go with the zombies.
Yeah, I think I will represent the other side of this argument. I would pick the energy deck. I feel like sitting down at any table with that energy deck, you're probably going to have a stronger, more long-lasting experience, Nooch. And that is going to allow that deck to provide you with more of a fun play experience. Whereas the zombie deck, very strong. I do think this is very close. This is not like the typical 4 Precon release where there's a clear loser and a clear winner. These are pretty strong right out of the gate. I just think that the zombie deck, the way it's constructed in the box, doesn't have enough card advantage to keep its hand really full, because it's constantly like trying to churn through all of its cards to give huge anthems. It just feels a little bit like an aggro deck that if it burns out, you're kind of burned out. Whereas the longer the game goes, I feel like the Teamer Energy deck only gets stronger. And so it really comes down to your play experience. Do you want to have a really big army of zombies that are attacking your opponents down, but once they deal with it, it's like, okay, I probably need to upgrade this with some like draw 3 for 2 mana and lose some life kind of things to just like keep my card advantage up and keep pressure on the board through a couple of board wipes throughout the game? Or do I want to sit down and just like probably have a little bit of a slower start, but by the time we're in turn 7 or 8, it's going to be pretty difficult to deal with the snowball, the energy ball that I've achieved at that point. That would be my approach to those two decks.
Yeah, dude, dealing with the energy ball, man, that I definitely see where you're coming from, and adding, your big card Portal to Phyrexia in there is going to be some good inevitability. And, I think both these decks, budget for the most part, there's some really good value in there right out the gate. And I do believe that both of them, before any upgrades, are very strong. We see more and more commander decks come out that are just super refined. And so if you're just getting into Magic and AETHERDRIFT is like your first time getting in, I think either of these you're going to have a good time with.
If you have liked this video or any little piece of this video, clicking subscribe really helps us out. We're working our way to 100K subs this year. And like we said in the video, we've got a live play Commander show in the works right now, or either out, depending on when you're seeing this. Check the pinned comment. There will be a link to that channel. Go subscribe to it for us and let us know what you think if there are episodes to watch. All of the people whose names you see scrolling in between us are our Patreon supporters at the $10 level or higher. They get, let me grab it. I'm just going to go out of frame and grab it real fast. A pack of custom dragon shields. This is the 2024 art. We've got 2025 art incoming. You get a free pack of custom dragon shields just for joining at that $10 level, as well as premium status on the Dragon Shield app for free. Go join our Patreon, see if it's a good fit for you. Thank you very much for watching.
And also a big thank you to you, the subscriber and the viewer. We appreciate you so much. Thank you for spending your time with us. We know that there's a lot of videos out there, so you deciding to watch our video means a lot.